From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
We're on our way back to where we started from. Happy music, a happy feeling. And the tempo has changed. The tempo has changed to something happy and bright. And all of a sudden, you can feel the spirit hit you. Joyous send-off. The magnificent Seventh Brass Band, authentic New Orleans jazz funeral. Milton Batiste, jazzly artist, producer. Our opening, notes for a play.
On our way back to wherever we started, it's a happy music, and a happy feeling. And the tempo has changed. The tempo's changed to something happy and bright. And all of a sudden you can feel the spirit hit you. As everybody's walking and clapping their hands, singing to the music, and dancing along. It's on the way back. Can't do no more for them. So let's be happy about his spirit going to the right place.
Magnificent Seventh Brass Band. Authentic New Orleans jazz funeral.
I'd like to dedicate this particular recording to Stanley Stevens, the late Stanley Stevens, who was a drummer, everybody's drummer.
Edward Douglas White was Chief Justice, everybody's Chief Justice.
Magnificent Seventh Brass Band. This is the jazz funeral.
Milton Batiste, jazzly artist.
Milton Batiste.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you welcome America's Law Librarian, the Law Librarian of Congress, our host, Roberta Schaefer.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our Mardi Gras celebration of Louisiana's great Chief Justice, Edward Douglas White, who took his seat as Chief Justice of the United States just over 100 years ago in 1910. And happy birthday, March 8th, 1841, to Mr. Justice Holmes. I am Roberta Schaefer, Law Librarian of Congress. On behalf of James H. Billington, Librarian of Congress, and myself, it is our pleasure to share a special treat with you this afternoon. A New Orleans jazz funeral celebrating the spirit of the fireside and of the hearth. Our composer for this Coolidge Auditorium preview takes us behind the scenes. This play has been in production for 14 years. It has played spectacular venues, including the chamber of the Louisiana Supreme Court on Royal Street in New Orleans. That edifice is guarded by sculptor Brian Baker's great bronze statue of Chief Justice White. You will see it in a moment. The Library of Congress welcomes Professor Baier back to First Street Northeast, Washington, D.C., where he worked inside the Supreme Court as a judicial fellow during the bicentennial of the Declaration of Independence. Paul is a graduate of the Harvard Law School. He teaches constitutional law at LSU Law Center in Baton Rouge. He appears in the play as Professor Richard Henry Jesse, who in his day was a close personal friend of Chief Justice White. Paul wrote the play from history. Father Chief Justice is a history come to life in the Library of Congress, Thomas Jefferson Building, right across the street from the Supreme Court and facing the U.S. Capitol where White presided. Anyone familiar with Washington's legal family would marvel at our Coolidge Auditorium dramatis personae. Charles J. Cooper, Tom Goldstein, Ronald S. Flagg, and Jacob A. Stein, who plays a venerable Holmes at 90 in the play. Donald Hoffman, a regular in the cast, is up from New Orleans to reprise his Holmes in Act 3. Paul has cast me as Fanny Holmes, my stage debut. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Justice William Brennan did not live to see Paul's play, but he read an advance copy and wrote Paul a note that I would like to share with you. It is a joyous send-off to our Coolidge Auditorium preview, and I quote, "I think you know that I support you in all your endeavors, but none more so than when you are illuminating the history of the great institution to which I have devoted 40 years of my life. I wish you all the best of luck with the play, and please remember to send me a copy of the program. Affectionately, Bill." Well, Mardi Gras is here. Holmes's birthday is here. Take it away, Professor Jesse.
With pleasure. Roberta, I'm to escort you to your seat. Come on. This is a jazz funeral. We're on our way back. Happy music, a happy feeling. And the tempo has changed. The tempo has changed to something happy and bright, and all of a sudden, you can feel the Spirit hit you. Father, Chief Justice, Edward Douglass White, and the Constitution. Notes for a play. I want to dedicate this Mardi Gras Coolidge Auditorium preview to Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr., Union Bluecoat of Boston, and to Edward Douglass White, Confederate soldier boy of Bayou Lafourche, Thibodaux, Louisiana. The blue and the gray as one. With a red rose for loved ones. The great Bryant Baker statue of Edward Douglass White looms large on the stage. The year is 1926, April 8th, Monday. A crowd has gathered on Royal Street, across the street from the old Civil Courts building which houses the Louisiana Supreme Court. A voice is heard, that of a professor type, musing over the scene. Royal Street fluttered with flags, we're told, when they unveiled the statue of Edward Douglass White in the heart of old New Orleans in 1926. Confederate veterans, still wearing the gray of '61, stood about the scaffolding. Above them rose Mr. Baker's great bronze statue of Chief Justice White, heroic in size and draped in the national flag. Somewhere in the crowd, a band played old Southern airs, soft and sweet in the April sunshine. It was an impressive occasion, reported the Times-Picayune, memorable because so many venerable men and women, such as yourselves, had come to pay their respects to a man whose career brings honor to Louisiana and to the nation. 85 years separate us from that event, 90 from White's death. Louisiana's great Chief Justice is only an ember on the hearth. We meet anew to rekindle the flame. I'm going off scripts. I was not allowed to light a candle, so I made special arrangements. Act 1, Portrait and Hearth. Professor Jesse is at his desk. It is cluttered with books, a small lighted candle, a vase of daisies. Professor Jesse teaches the court and the Constitution long after White's death. Alas, his friend is gone and almost forgotten. Carlyle says in his essay on portraiture that he would give more for a single picture of a man, whatever it was, than for all the books that might be written of him. Often I have found a portrait superior in real instruction to half a dozen written biographies, as biographies are written. Or rather, let me say, I have found that the portrait is a small lighted candle by which biographies could the first time be read and some human interpretation of them be made. Well, Father Chief Justice, what do you think of the fix I'm in? And what is that, you ask? Oh, well, I asked my students to identify your portrait. And by Jove, they flunk. Nobody remembers anymore that Louisiana put a Confederate soldier boy on the Supreme Court of the United States. So they remember Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr. well enough, Union Bluecoat of Boston, but they forget the Confederate gray of Bayou Lafourche. I mean you, Ned, Louisiana's great Chief Justice, E.D. White. Now, my dear Coolidge audience, notice the signature. Yours, E.D. White. He was everybody's Chief Justice. Scene 2, the boyhood home of Edward Douglass White along Bayou Lafourche in Thibodaux. The earliest photograph that we have is undated, but we think it's in the 1930s. Chief Justice White returned to his home as Chief Justice to see the South's sugarcane come back to life after the Civil War. The current structure shows quite an improvement over the primitive appearance of the home 80 years ago. The oak trees on White's boyhood home are older than the United States of America. Well, Mr. Justice Antonin Scalia of the current Supreme Court stood on the porch of White's boyhood home on March the 12th, 1994. This was the 100th anniversary of Louisiana's Edward Douglass White taking his seat as an Associate Justice. I was his driver. I had to take him to Thibodeau. He barked at me. He said, "I'm not going to Thibodeau." I said, "Mr. Justice, this is your duty." He said, "All right, but no speeches." And when he was on the porch, he saw the citizens of Thibodeau who had come. He looked at them and he said this: "Our history gives us our identity. If we forget about our history, we lose a part of ourselves." I want to thank Mr. Justice Scalia, muse of Father Chief Justice, for his centennial throw off the porch of White's boyhood home. Act 2, Soldier Boys. Captain Oliver Wendell Holmes is seated and keyed up for battle.
We have shared the incommunicable experience of war. We have felt, we still feel, the passion of life to its top. In our youths, our hearts were touched with fire. Oliver Wendell Holmes.
He's in the Valley of Antietam, and it's 3 a.m. He wrote home to his parents. I have the text of the letter. I wrote this from history, so this is what he actually said to his parents. I like it. It would be easy, after a comfortable breakfast, to come down the steps of one's home, putting on one's gloves and smoking a cigar. To get on a horse and charge a battery up Beacon Street while the ladies wave handkerchiefs from the balcony. But the reality was to face a night on the ground, in the rain, and your bowels are out of order, and then to wade a stream and attack the enemy. Antietam broke the 20th proud boast that they had never been hit in the back. Now, and Holmes was. He took a Confederate ball through the back of the neck and lived, by God's grace. So if you're hit in the back, you're retreating. We have stood side by side in a line. We have charged and swept the enemy. And honestly, we have run away like jackrabbits, which is all right, but not so good for the newspapers. Holmes served through the Wilderness Campaign and the siege of Vicksburg, and then telling himself that his duty lay in pursuing his philosophy. He left the Army after his 3-year term of enlistment was up. Whatever romance war had held for him, by this time, had gone up in the smoke of reality. Scene 2, prisoner at Port Hudson. Union naval forces bombard Port Hudson on the mighty Mississippi. This was the Confederacy's last and final stronghold. They caved in. Port Hudson fell March the 6th, 1863. 19-year-old Ned White, a strapping Confederate soldier boy, was taken prisoner. He is later paroled upon the plea of an anxious mother. 50 years later, Princeton University conferred upon Chief Justice White a Doctor of Laws degree, honoris causa. The audience heard the details of White's capture at Port Hudson from the lips of the Chief Justice of the United States. As a little boy, I went into the Army on the side that didn't win. I know I did myself more harm than I did to anybody else. I was taken prisoner, and my mother went to the officer in charge and asked to come in and see me. I had a prison number, and my number was called out, and I was marched along the dead line, where if a man crosses, he is shot. The Union officer looked at me and said, "My boy, you have no coat on. Go and get your coat." White said, "I cannot go back and get what I have not got." White's logic was always flawless. "Oh," said the Union officer, and taking the heavily braided blue coat which kept the cold from his vitals, he took it off. He unbuttoned it, button by button by button, and he said, "My boy, I am more warmly clad than you are. Put on my coat." Chief Justice White told his Princeton alumni audience that then and there, that simple act of kindness on the part of the Union captain sparked reconciliation and reunion, the blue and the gray as one in his heart. These selective draft law cases, well, you can see, my dear audience, that these two soldier boys later served side by side on the Supreme Court of the United States. That's Chief Justice White, now in his robe draped over large rounded shoulders. Holmes sits at the Chief Justice's right with a very nice mustache and his hands neatly coupled. Brandeis, Justice Brandeis, is corner left in the rear. At 50 comparative youth, he was appointed 1916. Well, it will not surprise you that the court decided that Congress had the power to conscript young men, the compulsory draft, and require that they fight for their country. The court rejected claims that somehow or other the draft violates the 13th Amendment, which prescribes slavery and involuntary servitude. White wrote an opinion for the court unanimously. This was during World War I, a time in which the Germans introduced the 75 millimeter gun. And Edward Douglass White lay awake once again at night, haunted by the anguish of war.
Is civilization going down in barbarism? Will not these German guns shot across the Channel destroy Great Britain and lay the world in ruin? Has the long, long fight for civilization come to naught?
This was at a time when Chief Justice White found it difficult to do any work at all.
I have constantly ringing in my ears the noise of the awful fight along the Belgian and French border, and the appalling thought of those splendid men who are giving up their lives haunts me day and night. How long, oh Lord, how long? That is the cry that naturally comes, but I can see no end. I trust in God that when the end does come, it will come right.
1 week before Chief Justice White announced the selective draft law opinions, he wrote to a friend,
I do not like to talk about the war situation. I hate to be pessimistic, but I dare not be hopeful. And I am afraid I am not good enough to pray. And I'm way too old to fight. I am at a bad fix, ain't I?
Chief Justice White's deep patriotism displayed itself in the middle of the lawyers arguing against the draft. The Chief Justice said it was improper and unpatriotic to say that the war was unconstitutional.
Jesse!
Our father, Chief Justice, yes.
Mon cher professeur.
Bonjour.
Are you here to take our audience to school?
Well, Father Chief Justice, you know how to take the nation to school far better than I. My part is only to state what the lawyers argued, and we will trust to your memory of the selective draft law cases as to the court's responsa.
Responsa? Why, Jesse, I haven't heard such Roman learning in years. Well done. Well now, let's see if this old jurisconsult is up to the task. You may proceed, as I tell lawyers at the court.
Well, if the audience please. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 12 of the Constitution gives Congress the power, and I quote, to raise and support armies. This is a Braille Constitution. You have to be blind to read it. Well, Chief Justice White's first response to the naysayers was to take note of this power and its logical implications.
As the mind cannot conceive an army without the men to compose it, on the face of the Constitution, the objection that it does not give power to provide for such men would seem to be too frivolous for further comment.
Well, you can judge for yourself Chief Justice White's flawless logic. Oh, said the lawyers, Congress has the power to raise armies, all right, but it must rely on volunteer enlistments. The power cannot include the right to enforce exact military duty from the citizen.
This argument but challenges the existence of all power. For a governmental power which has no sanction to it, and which therefore can be exercised only provided that the citizen shall consent to its exertion, is in no substantial sense a power at all.
The compelled military service is contrary to a free government and in conflict with all the great guarantees of the Constitution as to individual liberty, pleaded the lawyers.
But the premise of this proposition is so devoid of foundation that it leaves not even a shadow of ground upon which to base the conclusion.
The Chief Justice, may I say, learned a contrary premise at Port Hudson.
And my brother Holmes at Antietam.
These robust passages reveal Chief Justice White for what he was, an ardent patriot who knew no emotion greater than his devotion to country. Act 3, at home. Holmes' home, 4-story brick, framed in tree branches, 1720 I Street, Washington, D.C. Notice the second-story windows propped open in pursuit of fresh air. Holmes liked fresh air. It is Constitution Day, September 17th, anniversary of the Battle of Antietam. Mr. Justice Holmes and Mrs. Holmes are at home. They expect the Chief Justice to come calling for what is a yearly exchange of red roses between Captain Holmes and his Confederate enemy in arms, Ned White. Mr. Justice Brandeis is already on the domestic scene, having greeted Fanny. He's now with Holmes in the study on the second floor. Well, there is Holmes's desk. I like it. A nice lamp, a bouquet of daisies, a few books. Notice the bookcases, packed floor to ceiling, not an empty slot on the shelf. And look at Holmes's family sword above the hearth, a sword in its scabbard, a sword of oblivion and peace, a cozy place in which to read, write, and jaw the law. Justice Holmes is seated in his favorite horsehair armchair. He is reading from his book of speeches. This is the 5th edition, which dates the scene sometime after 1913. He is reciting to Brandeis from his speech, The Soldier's Faith, which takes Holmes back to Antietam, to September 17th, Constitution Day, 1863.
Now, at least, and perhaps as long as man dwells upon the globe, his destiny is battle, and he has to take the chances of war. War, when you are at it, is horrible and dull, but some teacher of the kind we all need. Out of heroism grows faith in the worth of heroism. The proof comes later, and may even never come. That, Louis, is a faith for the ages. Yesterday my belly kissed the ground at Antietam, and Ned White was a prisoner at Port Hudson. The CJ and I had been enemies, I like to tell my friends. Now look at us. C.J. White and Company want to put puny anonymities in jail for uttering a few doubts about Woodrow Wilson and the war. And you and I, Louis, must fight them off.
Well, the First Amendment, I'm sorry to say that the First Amendment is a dull sword these days. But our faith is different. We know that the freedom to think as you will, but then also to speak as you think, are means indispensable to the spread of public discourse and political truth. Those who won our independence, they knew that it was hazardous to discourage thought and hope and imagination. Believing in the power of reason as applied through public discourse, they eschewed silence coerced by law, the argument of force coerced in its worst form.
That's our Abrams dissent, Louis. Ladies and gentlemen, Abrams versus United States. Mr. Justice Holmes dissenting. Congress certainly cannot forbid all effort to change the mind of the country. Now, nobody can suppose that the surreptitious publishing of a silly leaflet by an unknown man without more would present any immediate danger. Why, I believe the defendant has as much right to publish these two leaflets as the government has to publish the Constitution of the United States, now vainly invoked by them. Why, it's battle, Louis. I tell you, the campaign of the Constitution, the joust of the First Amendment, and we've got to fight like hell to win the battle banner back. Never mind C.J. White and Mrs. Holmes want me to shut up.
Enter Fanny carrying a red rose. She places it on Holmes's desk.
Captain Holmes, calm yourself. Chief Justice White is expected, and it is Mrs. Justice Holmes's opinion that you should wage your war on the bench, not at home. It's Constitution Day, Wendell, and there will be peace and quiet on the Holmeses' domestic front. You will not charge the enemy at 1720 I Street.
A doorbell sounds off stage. Fanny exits. She thinks it's the Chief Justice. Enter Jesse. He greets Justice Holmes. Mr. Justice, nice to see you here. Coolidge Auditorium. Mr. Justice Brandeis, what an honor. I like your pocket watch.
Thank you, sir.
Act 3 features the annual exchange of red roses between White and Holmes on Constitution Day. This is a matter of documentable history. This was a symbol of the blood spill during the Civil War, of reconciliation and reunion thereafter, of the blue and the gray as one. Enter Fanny with the Chief Justice of the United States, who is carrying 2 roses.
The Chief Justice of the United States and Mrs. Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr.
Ah, my Boston boys. Well, I assume you've been talking behind my back. So what was it, Wendell? Was it the law? Or Louis? Was it fact? The court will take the matter under advisement, and God help us.
Chief Justice White presents a first rose to Justice Brandeis, meant for Mrs. Brandeis.
My brother Brandeis of Boston, I give you the Constitution, all wrapped up in a rose.
By Jove, that's poetry from a Jesuit. I tell you, Louis, our chief has insights. Now he shows himself a Goethe come round on Constitution Day. Father Chief Justice, I give you the United States of America.
And to my brother Holmes of the 20th Massachusetts, I give you the blue and the gray as one.
Act 3 ends with Holmes coming up center, and he addresses the audience with his rose in hand.
It is all a symbol, if you like, but so is the flag. The flag is but a bit of bunting to one who insists on prose, yet its red is our lifeblood, its stars our world, its blue our heaven.
Chief Justice White joins Holmes up center and exclaims,
I can recollect the day when to me, Old Glory was but an emblem of darkness, of misery and suffering, of despair and despotism. But in the clarified vision in which it is now given me to see it, although the stars and bars have faded away forever, the fundamental aspirations which they symbolized find their imperishable existence in the stars and stripes.
Holmes returns to his armchair, eases in, picks up his book of speeches, and resumes reading from The Soldier's Faith.
Perhaps it is not vain for us to tell the new generation what we learned in our day and what we still believe, that the joy of life is living, to ride boldly at what is in front of you, be it a fence or the enemy. We learned also, and we still believe, that love of country is not yet an idle name. As for us, our days of combat are over. Our swords are rust. Our guns will thunder no more. We have shared the incommunicable experience of war. We have felt, we still feel, the passion of life to its top. In our youth, our hearts were touched with fire. 3 years ago died the old colonel of my regiment, the 20th Massachusetts. He gave our regiment its soul. No man could falter who heard his "Forward, 20th." I went to his funeral. The church was empty. No one remembered the old man whom we were burying. No one save those next to him and us. And I said to myself, the 20th has shrunk to a skeleton, a ghost, a memory, a forgotten name which we older men alone keep in our hearts. And then I thought, it is right. It is as the colonel would have it. This is also part of a soldier's faith, having known great things, to be content with silence.
Fanny approaches Wendell up center with her own copy of speeches in hand. She has her own part in a moment. It is evident that they have recited the soldier's faith together many times before.
Just then, there fell into my hands a little song sung by a warlike people on the Danube, which seemed to me fit for a soldier's last work. Another song of the sword, but a song of the sword in its scabbard, a song of oblivion and peace.
Holmes breaks off. It's Fanny's turn.
A soldier has been buried on the battlefield, and when the wind in the treetops roared, the soldier asked from the deep, dark grave,
Did the banner flutter then?
"Not so, my hero," the wind replied. The fight is done, but the banner won. Thy comrades of old have borne it hence, have borne it in triumph hence.
Then the soldier spake from the deep, dark grave, I am content.
Then he heareth the lovers laughing pass, and the soldier asks once more,
Are these not the voices of them that love and remember me?
Not so, my hero, the lovers say. We are those that remember not, for the spring has come, and the earth has smiled, and the dead must be forgot.
Then the soldier spake from the deep, dark grave, I am content.
Act 4, by the light of reason. Here is the court at the turn of the century. Edward Douglas White takes his seat March the 12th, 1894. He's 50. His youth glistens on what is a very aged court. Chief Justice Melville Fuller in the center. His feet are fastened to the floor by foot cushion. The mighty Field on Fuller's left with his cane cutting his aged knees apart. The great John Marshall Harlan is on the right next to Fuller. Well, in 1894, ladies and gentlemen, the United States Supreme Court resolved the constitutionality of the first federal income tax law. Attorney General Olney argued the income tax case. Now, this is the Attorney General of the United States. He's arguing that the first federal income tax act was unconstitutional. And can you imagine the Supreme Court declared it unconstitutional? Well, glory be. Associate Justice White exclaimed in his dissent, this was destined to destroy itself. I mean, a government without the power to tax, the court rendered it a eunuch. It cast aside 100 years of precedent. Chief Justice White's dissent, this is an etching by Albert Rosenthal. When I found this right here, it says Albert Rosenthal. It says 1894 E.D. White. So this is the first sketch of White as an associate justice. White's dissent was his first. It was his first dissent in any important constitutional matter. And may I say that Edward Douglas White's vindication by we the people, because the 16th Amendment overruled the majority opinion in the old Pollock income tax case. This was a mighty achievement in the annals of the Supreme Court, may I say. Whether you are a fiscal conservative or a tax and spend liberal, believe me when I tell you that to be vindicated by the people in a constitutional amendment is a mighty achievement in the annals of the Supreme Court. The next scene is the Standard Oil octopus. Here are two presidents, Theodore Roosevelt and William Howard Taft, and this scene features their antitrust prosecution of the Standard Oil octopus, John D. Rockefeller. Look at this, the fuel tank head of the Standard Oil. The tentacles already entwined the Capitol. Rockefeller had all of them in his back pocket. And the tentacles are lashing out at the White House here. This from Puck Magazine's caricature. Here is the court 100 years ago. 2011 is the centennial of the Standard Oil decision. Chief Justice White in the center chair. I like it. It's ornately carved. You can see how Harlan looks very glum, for reasons you will hear in a moment, betwixt Chief Justice White and there is Oliver Wendell Holmes again. May I just take a moment to point out that Chief Justice Charles Evans Hughes, later Chief Justice, is corner rear on the right side with whiskers. Lurton's spectacles identify him. Chief Justice White, in 1911, condemned the Standard Oil octopus, applying what he called was the rule of reason. This is pretty well known. The Sherman Act outlaws every contract in restraint of trade, but Edward Douglas White decided that only unreasonable restraints of trade violate the Constitution. This got him into trouble with Brother Harland, you will hear in a moment. But first, let's listen to the Chief Justice exclaim his rule of reason.
Thus not specifying, but indubitably contemplating and requiring a standard, it follows that it was intended that the standard of reason, which had been applied at the common law and in this country in dealing with subjects of the character embraced by the statute, was intended to be the measure used for the purpose of determining whether, in a given case, a particular act had or had not been brought about the wrong against which the statute was intended to act.
No, all of this followed by the light of reason, as Your Honor was fond of saying.
Lex est raison. The law is reason, as I tell my confreres.
Well, Mr. Justice Harlan dissented. He exploded in anger over Chief Justice White's Standard Oil opinion. He launched out into a bitter invective going far beyond his written dissent, an outburst unmatched in the annals of the Supreme Court.
I confess to no little surprise as to what has happened in the present case. The court has, by mere interpretation, modified the act of Congress and deprived it of practical value as a defensive measure against the evils to be remedied. The court says that it now will, for the first time, bring the discussion under the light of reason.
Yes.
And apply the rule of reason to the questions to be decided. This statement surprises me quite as much as would a statement that white is black, or that black was white. I have the authority of this court for saying that such a course of proceeding on its part would be judicial legislation. This court has now read into the act of Congress words which are not to be found there, and has thereby done that which could not be done without violating the Constitution. Namely, by interpretation of a statute, changed a public policy declared by the legislative department. I dissent. God damn it!
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I trust you understand why Justice Holmes always referred to his brother Harlan as my lion-hearted friend. Well, Justice Holmes joined your opinion, not Harlan's, in the Standard Oil case, Chief.
Which pleased me very much, may I say.
President Roosevelt didn't think much of Justice Holmes's dissent in an earlier antitrust case, the Northern Securities case. Teddy Roosevelt said he could carve out of a banana a judge with more backbone.
Oh, well, may I say in my brother Holmes's defense that Theodore Roosevelt was not trained, how shall I put this, in the niceties of the law.
That's a good way to put it.
He asked my advice once on whether he should begin legal studies. Well, I told him that formal course of study would demean the office of the vice president. But I gave him a reading list of law books and told him to report to me for a weekly Saturday quiz. Unfortunately, President McKinley's assassination canceled our quizzes.
One more case, Mr. Chief Justice, and our short course on Edward Douglas White and the Constitution is complete. This is a civil liberties case arising under the 15th Amendment. You remember the grandfather clause case? Well, the 15th Amendment outlaws race discrimination in voting. Chief Justice White's court was the first to breathe life into the post-Civil War amendments, which may surprise the untutored. True, you joined the court's majority in Plessy v. Ferguson. This is a black mark on a white record, but as Chief Justice of the United States, he saw clearly. White wrote an opinion for the court in 1915 condemning Maryland and Oklahoma's grandfather clauses. So the 15th Amendment outlaws race discrimination in voting. You know what these states did? They said, well, let's require people to read and write. Well, this means the newly enfranchised blacks would not be permitted because they couldn't read and write. But these states said, well, if you were on the rolls as of the time the amendment was adopted, including a lot of illiterate whites in Oklahoma and Maryland, you could vote. White declared this an obvious end run around the 15th Amendment. It made a farce out of the 15th Amendment. And this court condemned the grandfather clause cases. Well, this was a mighty civil rights victory long before Chief Justice Earl Warren's court. And now let me escort you to your seat, but before we do, I want to thank the curator's office of the Supreme Court. I want to thank the Supreme Court Historical Society. And because, look at these images. I mean, where do you find something signed? E.D. White, that's your signature, isn't it? Good. Well, let's trot off the stage, Mr. Chief Justice. Act 5, our last act. Do you know Dickens' Cricket on the Hearth? It tells the story of Caleb Plummer, a loving father, and his blind daughter. They lived all alone. Act 5 depicts the cricket spirit in Edward Douglass White. He too had a cricket on his hearth and spoke the voice in which the spirits of the fireside and of the hearth address themselves to all humankind. Scene 1, dance with the music. The Chief Justice and Leda White are at home. He at his desk was made of bald cypress. She's in a rocking chair, reading the Washington newspaper. Chief Justice White rises from his desk, comes up center, and he reads a letter home to his lawyer friend, Henry Dart, as death plucks White's ear. 27 years ago, when I came to the Supreme Court, it was suggested that I would lose touch with the lawyers of Louisiana. On the contrary, every tie of friendship is rooted in Louisiana, from which I hope never to be separated. I was born there. My father and grandfather lived there. And everything that is dear to me in memory is associated with it. There are whisperings that I will retire in favor of Taft. The New York Times reported that I would. Taft actually visited me and, like a doctor of physics, inquired as to my health. I said nothing of quitting. I warned him instead of the dangers of wrong decisions. As to the statue you propose, should one ever be erected in my memory, I would prefer my bronze bones to rest in peace on Royal Street, in the Vieux Carré, rather than in the National Statuary Hall in the Capitol. To Captain Holmes of the 20th Massachusetts, I confessed my surgery tomorrow, 11:30 a.m. in a letter carried to 1720 I Street this morning. It may be my last farewell, as God wishes, should I see my pilot face to face when I have crossed the bar. White now stands at attention, soldier-like, his head held back, his eyes facing heaven, cataracts squeeze his eyes shut. He thinks back to the blue at Fredericksburg, the gray at Port Hudson. He recites the closing part of his letter to Holmes. I got to worrying about some of the work and came back to the library here to get things straight, and then to go back and face the music, which I propose to do tomorrow. It is not music of any ordinary sort, but I'll step out in hope and confidence in the outcome, which I know I will do, if I can only keep my mind on that fellow who's on his belly at Fredericksburg, who has only one fear, that he'll be shot in the back. White did not survive the surgery. Burial high atop Georgetown, Oak Hill Cemetery, Washington, D.C. Scene 3, memorial proceedings. City of Washington, January 1922. The Supreme Court justices meet in the courtroom in the Capitol to pay their last respects to Chief Justice White. Chief Justice Taft, his successor, speaks for the court. Edward Douglass White had a great heart, full of sympathy for mankind. He had an unfailing courtesy and a sweetness of manner which endeared him to all with whom he was associated. He was a gentleman of the old school. He carried candy in his pocket for little children, cigars for his colleagues gladly received. He was everybody's Chief Justice. Chief Justice White's power as a speaker was revealed in later years by the few addresses he was induced to make to the American Bar Association. At Washington, his hearers were captivated by the grace and fluency of his diction, the dignity and force of his bearing, and the depth of his expressed conviction. His touching metaphor to illustrate his own change of heart toward Old Glory, of the fading of the gray of the Confederacy into the blue of the Union, the invisible blue, as he adapted it from the moving story of the cricket on the hearth, will never fade from the memory of those who were privileged to hear him. Scene 4, the kind voice of friends. Mr. Justice Holmes is seated on a bench up center. Mr. Justice, please. His hat is in his hand. This is 10 years later, spring of 1931, Beverly Farms, Massachusetts. At 90, Holmes is as handsome as ever. His mind drifts back to Antietam, to his survival of a shot through the back of the neck, to his service with Ned White, miracle that it was. Holmes's voice is heard over the scene, mellow at 90 as the final curtain nears.
In this symposium, my part is only to sit in silence. To express one's feelings as the end draws near is too intimate a task. But I may mention one thought that comes to me as a listener in. The riders in a race do not stop short when they reach the goal. There is a little finishing canter before coming to a standstill. There is time to hear the kind voice of friends and to say to oneself, the work is done. But just as one says that, the answer comes, the race is over, but the work never is done while the power to work remains. The canter that brings you to a standstill need not be only coming to rest. It cannot be while you still live, but to live is to function. That is all there is in living. And so I end with a line from a Latin poet who uttered the message more than 1,500 years ago. Death plucks my ear and says, live, I am coming.
Holmes rises stiffly from his bench. He steps forward toward the audience, still lost in reverie, as though to greet his old chief, E.D. White, one last time. He is dangerously near the edge of the stage. A voice is heard off stage. Mr. Justice! Mr. Justice Holmes breaks Holmes's reverie. Mr. Justice Holmes, I'm Professor Richard Henry Jesse. We're honored, delighted to have you here in Thibodaux, Louisiana, White's birthplace.
Thibodaux? I thought the scene was Beverly Farms, Massachusetts. You mean we're actually in Ned White's land of sugar cane and Spanish moss?
Yes, Mr. Justice.
Well, I'll be damned. I should like to see White's sugarcane fields in full regalia, if you please. You should have heard White roar about the economic ruin left by the war. I liked White, you know. He was a great friend of mine, a big, high-minded man. Of course, his writing was too long-winded.
Yes, that's what they say.
Just as he used to criticize my opinions for being too cryptic. But his thinking was profound. Reason was his major premise. By the light of reason, he was fond of saying, Christ knows did it pour forth. I prefer my sledgehammer can't helps, you know, things that I can't help myself thinking. The Constitution does not enact Mr. Herbert Spencer's social statics. Now, there's a sledgehammer, Jesse. While we're at it, son, I want to sit at the hearth of White's boyhood home. Only Confederate soldier boy I knew who was proudly Chief Justice of the United States.
Thibodaux citizens, I'm sure, Mr. Justice, will welcome you into their hearts and homes. We're honored to have you here.
Considering the circumstances, Jesse, I should rather say the fascination is completely mine.
But first, we have to finish our play.
What play? I thought I was sitting in silence at Beverly Farms.
No, this is the last act of a play about Chief Justice White and the Constitution.
And I suppose next you'll tell me I'm in it.
Oh, yes, indeed you are.
Good thing a play. like a molded bronze or a painted portrait, helps to keep our memories, our reverence, and our love alive, and to hand them on to new generations all ready to forget. It made a play about me, you know, called it The Magnificent Yankee. That's the play. Reminded me of what I said when I saw Hopkinson's great portrait of yours truly unveiled at the court. Of course, it's not me, but I like to think others believe it is so. It's not me, but it's damn good, and let the American people think so.
All right.
What do you call your play?
Jesse.
Jesse.
Father, Chief Justice.
Ah! By Jove, that fits White fine. Louis, I mean, Mr. Justice Brandeis, used to address him that way formally at conference. Father Chief Justice, is it? What would you have me say in this play of yours?
Just tell our audience what you remember most about White.
Remember most? That's easy. I should say simply that he lived fully. He breathed the actions and passions of his time. He gave us a sample of his best. More than that, you cannot ask of any man, Jesse.
Is there one scene that sticks in your mind, Mr. Justice?
Oh, well, now you're sneaking me into script writing again.
That's right.
My dear Jesse. Oh, yes, there's a scene, all right. What White said about his change of heart towards Old Glory. Fanny and I were in black tie at the Willard Hotel that night. Always enjoyed getting suited up, trotting out to dine, with Fanny on my arm, you know. Now, there was a speech by which to remember Thibodeau's Soldier Boy. Our Father Chief Justice, E.D. White.
Thank you, Mr. Justice. Act 5, Scene 5. We reach the end. This is a view of the Capitol from the Treasury. The Willard Hotel is on the left. You may recognize it. It's about the right date because we're attending a black tie dinner with Holmes and Fanny and Leda White and the Chief Justice at the Willard. Thursday evening, October the 22nd, 1914. 1914 was the 20th anniversary of Edward Douglass White's service. So the ABA had a dinner party. The traditional toast, the Supreme Court of the United States, was presented to Chief Justice White. I discovered what White said, preserved in the American Bar Association Journal. And when I read his remarks, I knew I had the end of this play. That's a final note, off script, but Chief Justice White responded by embracing his entire audience, not alone of lawyers involved in great affairs, but of all, however narrow the sphere in which they move, not alone of judges engaged in great affairs, but of all. To respond to a toast has always seemed to me to be submitting oneself to a roast because of the discomfort by anticipation, the misery in performance, and the dissatisfaction on account of things since only afterwards thought of. By tradition, the Chief Justice of the United States is never expected to reply to an after-dinner toast. The warmth of the committee in this instance, however, overcame my personal disinclination because of a feeling that the invitation would afford me of an opportunity to rely upon that so infrequently relied upon clause, the equal protection of the laws, by turning the tables on my brethren of the profession and compelling them to be listeners. Long pause, as though thinking back to Port Hudson. I take it may not at this late date be doubted that the underlying controversies which brought about the Civil War existed prior to the Constitution. As the result of divergent institutions and conflicting opinions which were not harmonized when that document was accepted, and which therefore were fanned into the flames which produced that mighty conflagration. But neither side to that mighty struggle sought to destroy constitutional government. And this affords a ready explanation of how, when the smoke of battle had passed away and the storm had subsided, the supremacy of our constitutional system by natural operation resumed its sway, and peace and brotherhood reigned where enmity and warfare had hitherto prevailed. Let me illustrate. Do you recall the father and his blind daughter depicted by Dickens in Cricket on the Hearth, where, with a tenderness which may not be described, mistaken though it may have been, in order to conceal the poverty and misery of their environment, the father depicted to his daughter, who could not see, their environment as one of prosperity and affluence. Let us listen to her as she places her hand upon his thin, threadbare gray coat, which she thought from his description to be of some luxurious fabric, and ask, "What color is it, Father?" "What color, my child?" "Oh, blue. Yes, yes, invisible blue." And now, with the mists of the conflict of the Civil War lifted from my vision, as my eyes fall with tender reverence upon that thin gray line, lo, the invisible has become the visible. And the blue and the gray, thank God, are one. As Chief Justice White leaves the rostrum and walks back to the head table, to the waiting arms of Lita White, Mr. Justice Holmes stands erect and salutes his father, Chief Justice Edward Douglas White. Lita White and Fannie Holmes and the entire audience are on their feet in thunderous applause. Tears roll down White's cheeks. The final cut from the Magnificent Seven's brass band's authentic New Orleans jazz funeral is entitled "Feels So Good." Mr. Ronald Flagg, Mr. Justice Harlan. Ronald is the president of the District of Columbia Bar Association. Thank you, Ronald. Tom Goldstein, an esteemed Washington SCOTUS blogger and appellate advocate, Supreme Court litigator, Mr. Justice Brandeis. Well, give it up for Roberta Schaefer, the law librarian of Congress. Don Hoffman, Mr. Justice Holmes, Act 3, up from New Orleans. Justice, thank you. Our father, Chief Justice Chuck Cooper and Mrs. Cooper. Come on, Chuck. And a venerable justice, Mr. Jake Stein, D.C. legal spectator, Justice Holmes, Act 5. You'll be on the train. And ladies and gentlemen, of course, I'm living a dream here. I'm your playwright, just a law professor. 35 years ago, I worked at the court. And I owe much to many people. But Roberta, I am living a dream. Now, so let's take a final bow. Down we go. Thank you. Thank you. Now, go over here. Spread apart. You go over here. Okay, as the audience, just step aside. As the audience leaves the theater, the Rosenthal portrait of Chief Justice White is projected onto the stage. Feels so good. From the Magnificent Seven's authentic New Orleans jazz funeral, captures the spirit. In the foyer, two Thibodeau teenagers pass out long-stemmed red roses to the audience, and they say, well, here is a red rose. Thank you for coming. Give it to a loved one. The roses disappear in short order. Ready? Professor Jesse is pleased. And now, as Shakespeare says, exeunt.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.